Once again, it's time for the Cult of Honesty, and tonight I have no clue as to what the questions are, but I'm sure that our panel is ready to have the conversation.
Do you think you're jazzed?
Jazzed?
Yeah, do you think you're jazzed?
I don't know. You know, Christopher Mouty, he sent me a picture of what he was cooking this afternoon, and I asked him to send it to the studio hot and ready, and he didn't do so, and so I think we need to pull his show.
I would call that animal cruelty.
Yeah, I think we need to pull his show. I mean, no one needs to treat us like that. That is just wrong.
It's abuse. Abuse.
That's worse than being
on
a
par with
presuppositionalist.
Yahweh.
Would you agree?
On par with Yahweh,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, victims. Here we are, and so I'm not going to be much in the conversation. I'm going to sit back and listen. So you guys...
So I'll introduce the Hangouts. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
You normally
Are
like
you
to.
okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
I like to have that power.
You like to have the power.
All right. So without further ado, I want to introduce the moderator of our Hangouts, the host of Inspiring Honesty, and the honey boo boo of science, Mr. Greg Bray. Greg, how are you doing this evening?
I am wonderful. A little thrown off by that intro. Not gonna lie. Is Honey Boo Boo the kid or the mom? Because one is way more insulting than the other.
I've had that waiting for you for 2 weeks, and I'm waiting for just the right moment.
I'm assuming it's the kid because she's adorable.
It's the kid.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm happy. Welcome to the Cult of Honesty, or our hangout tonight. We've got a full house going on. We have a couple of newer participants. For example, Jason, you joined us last week, but didn't really. Well, one, you were sort of broadcasting from the dark, and two, you were a little quiet. So it's nice to see you with light this week and there. Now we have a new lurker from the dark, Shane. Shane, did you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I'm Shane. I'm currently in Jacksonville, Florida. Background, I guess if it's relevant to this, came out of pretty deep religious background. I'm glad I came out of it. And love the place, love this group, and I've learned a lot in the last couple of weeks just watching. So honored, happy to be a part.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. That's awesome.
Then we also do have Matthew and Alex, I guess non-regular quite yet participants. So welcome to the hangout today. It's always nice to have new people coming, and then a bunch of people that like to hear themselves talk. So that's me, Bob, Chris, and well, I'd say that about Daryl, but frankly, Daryl, we'd like to hear you talk more. So.
Oh, okay. I'll work on it.
The topic for today's hangout, the topics, I guess, generally speaking, were suggested by Alex with a little bit of a help from our friend Richard he was participating last week. We wanted to talk about morality and the specific question. Alex, did you want to introduce it since it's your topic, or?
Well, I'm not going to say it's my topic. Hold on, let me pull it up. But I think, it was just defining morality without, without God or the Bible in it. I think, that's pretty much it.
So the way that you had worded it specifically on when you proposed it was morality without the Bible. How do we define the standard? And then also the other alternate topic that you suggested, and I think that the two of them are related, is death and coping with / understanding the reality of it. Specifically, the cessation of the conscious mind or life after death, because in many theistic ways or many theistic ideologies, the rewards and punishment after death are very strongly related to the questions of morality, which is why I see them to dovetail so nicely. And then the last part that I wanted to suggest we sort of consider, and we can bounce around between topics here, but this came from Christian, who is not participating at the moment, but said he may be interested in, or may be able to join us. That is Euthyphro's dilemma from a dialogue that Plato wrote. It is, I believe the dialogue is called Euthyphro, but it's, is the pious loved by gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? So another question that plays very strongly into morality from a theistic perspective. So, kind of a broad scope here. The question that I'm going to ask directly for anybody who wants to take this on is, how do you heathen, godless atheists even know the difference between right and wrong? How can you justify anything that you do, and why do you not eat babies all the time?
Once in a while is good enough.
A little bit of ketchup.
Could it have something to
Baby
do with
cows.
Yeah, there's no need to be a glutton.
Well, I'm going to be devil's advocate and say that even though I'm an atheist, I grew up in a Roman Catholic home, and even if I didn't grow up in a Roman Catholic home, I grew up in American culture that is heavily influenced by religion. So I would say that culturally, I'm kind of bound to certain religious, moral, and ethical standards. Now, as far as an adult, the standards that I choose for my morals and ethics, that's a little bit different. But I can't deny that my current morals and standards aren't shaped by certain moral, cultural standards.
And they just happen to be Christian.
I mean, I live in America.
Right.
I have a question for you specifically coming from a Catholic background that I think this is a fun little social experiment I like to do. Is fish meat?
It's fish meat. We didn't think so because on Fridays we ate fish sticks.
So do you still agree that fish is not meat?
Oh no, that's
Or
a
has that-
ridiculous concept. Oh yeah, fish is meat.
It's a fantastic question to ask anybody who's Catholic because they're confused by the question more frequently than you could possibly imagine.
Really?
My wife's family is Catholic. It was fun when they just went, "What are you even talking about? Of course fish isn't meat." Like it.
Isn't?
Yes, fish is meat. Yeah, that was. Of course, fish isn't meat. That was the argument. They're like, no, of course not. It's fish.
Okay.
Now, it is slightly different in appearance, but you know, that helps them perhaps to think so. But
So, Greg, are you only asking the atheists this question? I'm not allowed to answer. Is that?
Oh, theists are more than welcome to posit their ideas on how atheists can resist the urge to constantly eat babies.
But you know, it's not. I'm not so sure that the religious have been able to always resist that. You know, when you take a look at history, Christian morals have changed throughout history. I mean, you know, so that I think that it is also true. I think Christians are just lying to themselves when they think that they get their morals from the Bible. They get their morals the same way you do, from the culture, from the influence that is around them, and even if the Bible is part of that story, that's part of that story, but we all acquire our morals through some form of socialization and growing up and developing in the culture we're in, and that's it for everybody, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree, Bob.
So-
I think that atheists do get their morals the same way that theists do, and specifically Christians do. And I think that the best guiding rule is to follow Christ.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, but
I'm being very serious. I know that I joke a lot, and I'm
Yeah.
baiting a little bit, but I'm very serious. Jesus Christ is credited for saying, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you."
Yeah, that's true, but he's certainly not the only one, and I think there's even something about it that is almost innate to empathy. That he simply articulated it very clearly. I get now as I'm a person I'm more consider myself a Jesuist, influenced by Jesus and an admirer of him than a Christian, which identifies me with that religion. But you know, I think he was a person of particular clarity. You know,
Sure. I'm being a little.
Dr. Jones,
I'm being a
Dr.
little
Jones,
honored.
did Jesus really say that? Are you sure? Can we be wrong?
I'm being a
Leave
little,
it to Chris to pull up the precepts.
I'm being a little ornery in my speech here, guys, because I certainly don't view Jesus Christ in the way that a traditional Christian or even the majority of Christians would. And I agree with what Bob is saying, that other people phrase things that way, etc. But I think that it's a good thing to give credit where credit is due. Now, whether Jesus Christ was real or not, we have a story. I'm a huge Battlestar Galactica fan, and I like to give credit for the people who said the great things in those stories. Now, in some sense, it doesn't matter whether the story is true or not. It inspires and moves people. And the story of Jesus Christ moved me my entire life. And now that I really ask the question in a very real way, who was he? And was he God, or was he a deity in a way that I'm not, or at all, etc. Whether or not no matter what these questions come out to be, the fact is that we do have a story in front of us all of a man who said that the most important rule of all is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so whether or not we believe in God or not, I think that we have to give him credit as at least being one person who said it quite well.
No, we only have to give credit to the fact that it was codified in a specific book. We don't have any evidence that that was the first time and place that the concept had been conceived.
Right. I'm not.
As a matter of fact, we have plenty of evidence that
somebody has a demon.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not suggesting, but I'm not suggesting that he was the first person. What I'm suggesting is that the story is very popular, and in that story he did say it, and whether or not he copied it is a different question. But he said it, and I think that it's a good example to follow.
But an example of that we can see very clearly is the woman caught in the act of adultery from John chapter 7. We now know from textual criticism that was a rather late insertion into the text. It wasn't even a part of the original book of John. It's a very Jesus-like story, but even a lot of Christians are willing to admit that never happened. But what a wonderful story it is. It depicts a certain attitude towards all that. The woman caught in the act of adultery brought to Jesus, and they say, Moses commanded us to stone her. What do you say we should do? And then Jesus, bending down, writing in his hand, saying, let the one among you without sin cast the first stone. Of course, I'm wondering, where the hell is the guy?
Yeah.
Right. Well, because that wasn't a problem back then. Which is an interesting point as well when we talk about morality on a biblical scale, or even I struggle with this question because I'm often accused of relativism because I recognize that morality as sort of an emergent property of culture and of the human understanding of the world changes with time. It's not something that 2,000 years ago we were aware of some of the moral concepts that we are now. So it was perfectly acceptable at that time to own slaves. But that doesn't mean that it was perfectly moral to own slaves. It's such a... If we go back in time and apply modern-day morality to it, we can certainly condemn these things. But at that time, it was not condemned in the same way. And I wonder what things we do now will have that sort of a relationship to the future.
Sure.
Won't you say, therefore, that what we're saying here is that there's a certain sense in which morality is an empathetic awareness of what's innate to our nature as creatures, but that culture is developing its insight into just who we are as creatures, and as a result is updating and modifying its sense of sensitivity to the well-being of who we are as beings. And so, it just didn't occur to them in the past, some of these things, perhaps, but as we think about it more, as we give it more consideration, as we begin to be more honest about the impact we have on each other, well, our morality is developing. So there's a sense in which it may be an innate absolute based on our nature, but that our grasp of it is constantly growing and developing.
But Greg, and I'm going to press this point a little bit further, don't you think that the golden rule causes us to rise above our cultural circumstances? Don't you think that concept is the thing that makes us move forward in the things that although are not defined morally right now in our culture, are certainly the things that should be defined as good morals.
Sure. As a matter of fact, I'd even go so far as to say that empathy is, as Bob I think has been making the point, empathy is the core source of morality. The human ability to understand how our actions affect other people is why we even have a concept of morality. If we were unable to grasp that, our actions affect the emotional, mental, and physical well-being of other things, then we would be working on the same level of I don't know, a grasshopper. To throw, I guess, one possible example of, I don't know, we've all seen A Bug's Life, and the grasshopper seemed pretty mean there. But the codification of empathy into the Golden Rule is certainly a significant turning point in human history. That did happen well before Jesus' time, though. It's documented. It's originally a Hindu concept, but it's a significant one because empathy is a human emotion, but for the first time, when it was written down in the "do unto others as they would have them do unto you," or no, as you would have them do unto you, is a beautiful and simple way of stating that concept, and it's easily teachable. So really important.
I have a ton of, well, not a ton, but I have a lot of friends, some theists, some atheists, probably mostly atheists, who are, and my theist friends probably is like fingernails on a chalkboard to them, but they are Star Trek fans. But a lot of the concepts that happen in Star Trek are not original. There are plenty of science fiction that preceded it.
Sure.
So I do concede that it may not be an original point, but it is a very popular story, and that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know that it even has to be original, because the truth is it suits us as human beings, and anybody who's going to be thinking about it and struggling with the idea of what suits us as human beings is going to make that discovery. And because there's a sense in which the discovery of that idea, that do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, is something that we notice as being congruent with the nature of who we are as human beings. By the way, there's the Reader's Digest version, which is kind of like the tarnished rule that I've often liked. It's the one that goes, do unto others.
I'm glad we got to the Golden Rule and empathy specifically. I think that's something that I wanted to discuss. Why empathy is important. Is it because we're creating a model of somebody in our mind? So I create a model about somebody and I make them, I do something bad, or I insult them or something. Is it because I'm relating it back to myself and I feel bad that makes me moral? Is moral, in a sense, very selfish? It's to avoid consequences, whether those consequences are being put in prison, for example, or the feelings of guilt, or basically guilt is a good example. Let's go with guilt for now.
I would use self-centered rather than selfish. Because I think that all of these things begin at an immature level. We have ourselves as a reference because we're very familiar with ourselves, and I think that empathy will begin as a internal projection. But as we mature, I think we can begin to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and begin to imagine how they must feel in a manner we don't. And so I think it begins there, but it can grow, so that it begins being self-centered, and I don't mean that in a negative way, just that that's my frame of reference.
Yeah, I prefer. I appreciate that definition, actually.
I do have to say, though, I think, Bob, you missed a bit of, or you didn't cover quite what Alex was getting to, in that the reason that we adhere to these principles, is it because we think that that's what we should do on sort of an egalitarian level, or because it makes us feel bad to cause these feelings or these consequences to other people? I think
it's more advanced. I think it's more advanced that happens, that we would feel bad about it. I think it really is rooted in our own sense of vulnerability.
I also don't think that that the answer can be that simple, that it's one or the other. I think
Right.
the sense of empathy that a complex human being has is as I would just imagine, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but as Bob suggests, begins with the self and how we relate to the world, and our recognition that other people are like us, and a sense of protecting ourselves and protecting others out of self-interest, and all of these things and other elements come together to create a very quick and natural sense of empathy. I mean, when I see somebody else suffering, I don't say, well, I don't say to myself, I wouldn't like to suffer that way, so I should feel bad, and then I feel bad. It happens instantly. It is on an instinctive level, and I think it's built on these things as we grow.
But just because it happens innately at this point in your life, it doesn't mean that that's not rooted in the same, I guess, the psychological history. It's not simply a conditioned response at this point, in that if you learned it by that projection, it still is sort of an extension of it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, that's why I use the term as we grow, because I think that it's built on these things.
Well, I think that you bring up an interesting point, because there are models of moral development, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't
Yes.
Kohlberg have a model of moral development? And so the reason maybe why we behave morally as children is fear, guilt, punishment driven. And as we get older, it is more of a value that we commit to consciously. So it might be a very, very different reasons. It might be a spectrum of reasons, and it might change as we get older.
There's even quite a controversy going on at times in the psychology community as to the moral development of boys versus the moral development of girls.
Gilligan is popular for the female version, right?
And there is some controversy as to whether or not this is different or the same. And there's also some studies that have been really done more to kind of justify cultural attitudes about gender more than really being a reflection of real study. So that's a topic I don't think has been completely thoroughly settled by psychology, but there's nonetheless stages of moral development that we go through that kind of build upon. Each stage builds upon the success of the lower stage.
Here we are in the Cult of Honesty. This is a group of people that, for the most part, and probably entirely made up of people that think deeply about these subjects and others, and they're very important to us in our lives. But we have to recognize in this conversation that there is a large group of people in this world, debatably larger than this category that we have here, that are not so empathetic. They don't necessarily look towards the feelings of others before themselves. Am I wrong about that?
I think we can
I think that you're absolutely right. There's a huge amount of people that don't do that, and I think that that's actually a necessary function of the way that our society works. Even we've promoted this over time, and I mean I'm the socialist in me is coming out a bit with that commentary, but
well, don't we have degrees of sociopathy? It's not like you're a sociopath or not, and we also know some of the contributing influences to becoming sociopathic, and some people, having gone through certain experiences, may have suffered to a degree becoming sociopathic and have learned to protect themselves by I don't care.
Yeah, and it starts in childhood. I mean, you can start off being conduct disorder, oppositionally defiant, and and those are specifically juvenile diagnoses. I don't mean to get like total DSM on you, diagnostic and statistical manual psychology on you, but after 18, those diagnoses don't hold, and you just pretty much are labeled an a-hole or a sociopath. And those people might very well be super intelligent and very successful, but they really do kind of lack a certain amount of empathy. So, I mean, they still exist in the world. I mean, I had a fantasy when I was younger that when I got into the real world, the real working world, that I would eschew all of these not nice people that I was surrounded by. And, I was kind of blown away that when I entered the work field that I was still surrounded by these a-holes. So, I mean, they're everywhere.
I will openly admit I was diagnosed as oppositionally defiant, or with oppositionally defiant disorder as a kid, and I think some of that does, right? Yeah. Who would have guessed that the guy who loves to argue got such a diagnosis? And some of that does play into a cultural thing. Some of these labels that we create for people, even the sociopathology, we make the label sociopath to mean somebody who does not feel empathy or does not act upon empathy, but that doesn't mean that is necessarily part of the human condition, which is
there are many people who appear to be sociopathic in terms of the significance that they would attest to experiencing when it comes to empathy, and yet they are not necessarily maniacs. They just simply don't see the reason to act in a manner that is not conducive to the well-being of others, and so they don't. But it's not out of some sense of I shouldn't or that would, and of course one odd thing about sociopaths is it's not a lack of empathy because they're oblivious to it. Sociopaths are particularly dangerous because they understand exactly how you feel and what triggers your feeling that way. They just find that to be useful information to use against you.
Greg,
and
I
point that I was making.
A question, if I might interrupt just for a moment, because you're dealing with something that's very dear to me, and I would like an explanation from your background in biology, since you are a biologist, and that has to do with the mirror neurons. And it's been told to me various times that we are looking and in a sense mimicking, and it has much to do with these mirror neurons. Can you explain that for us, please?
Yes, and I'm going to open by saying I'm not a neurobiologist. I'm more macro scale, but I do have a fair degree of knowledge in this one. Specifically, part of it was training in pedagogy. I was part of, or that's part of being a teacher as well, and going through the education program, which I completed and just never got the certification. The mirror neurons are poorly understood at this point. We're coming to get a better understanding of what they are, but we believe that they play an incredible role in learning, and that's why modeling is such an important way that people learn, or especially children learn behavior from, is the whole do what I say and not what I do concept is actually a terrible way of getting across any sort of point, because people learn much faster and much more integrally by watching something happen or doing it themselves. And it comes to the point where they literally have neurons in their body that seem to only have the function of replicating things that they see, and specifically things that they can relate to in other similar beings. They would not replicate the actions of a dog or a cat, but because these little humans identify with other humans, they make this emotional connection, which somehow triggers these neurons to be associated in such a way that they duplicate.
So basically, one of the things that we're saying, just for clarity's sake, that these mirror neurons seem to be the developing of a response based upon having visualized this in someone else. Whereas like when you learn the piano, there's muscle memory that you're developing when you're playing the piano. But these mirror neurons, you watch somebody else play the piano, and you're actually learning how to play the piano by watching them do it.
Now, when we talk about that which, when dealing with right and wrong, for instance, and we start talking about that which coincides actually with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, can you explain how all of this works with these mirror neurons, please?
Not really. Anybody?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, it's my understanding that psychologists and neurologists are dealing with why are we making right and wrong decisions, if we can call them right and wrong. And I'm not going to get into the linguistic mindset there, but I'm just asking something to do with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and what actually coincides or what happens there when it has to do with right and wrong decisions, and how does that interplay, if you will, with these mirror neurons. I thought we might get some information here. I'd like to hear something about that.
It's an interesting question. I couldn't speak to it.
Okay.
Well, executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex is still pretty much a mystery. As far as intention goes, as far as where intention comes from, how the human brain, how consciousness is used consciousness is unique in the sense that it guides intention and intention guides it. So and consciousness is still a mystery in the world of neuroscience and neuropsychology and psychology itself. So you're asking a question that is still open-ended. The jury's still out on that, Dr. Jones.
Well,
but I'll tell you,
and even mirror neurons themselves are not something that are anatomically identifiable. We can't say, like, oh, this one here is a mirror neuron, not to be confused with a memory neuron. Or
it's an observed function.
Right. So it's more of a label that we've created than necessarily an anatomical specimen.
I'll tell you what, I read a book a while back. I read a book a while back that really impressed me. Although the book's title is ADHD and the Nature of Self-Control, written by Russell Barkley. Although the book starts with the title ADHD, the beginning of the book, he explains a great deal of how the inhibitive processes of the brain are developed, and this guy is a neurologist. And I'll tell you, reading that book was just an eye-opener to me in terms of some of those processes. Dr. Jones, if that's a question you have actually personally, I would even recommend you pick up that book and might share with you a number of things as you see in terms of the inhibitive process is a big part of our whether we do something or not, or whether we think it's right or wrong, or whether we're impulsive. And of course, that's where he's going with it in the terms of the impulse control of the person with ADHD. But he covers it by laying a foundation of explaining some of these aspects and dealing with the frontal lobes. So you might find that book interesting.
Okay. Many theologians have argued that goodness, in a sense, is innate, not in a full circle context, but they would argue that it is innate. And so one of my questions would be, how much of it is innate? In other words, there are some studies being done actually by Noam Chomsky, which is, I'm very much a fan of his, concerning the genome factor. And so what are your ideas in this context?
I think humans are neutral to begin with. Not in a complete tabula rasa sense, like they come out completely neutral, but as far as the question of morality goes, I think that they're relatively neutral and almost negative in the sense of self-serving, like Bob was just saying, and the way that they manifest that self-serving is a function of how they're raised.
So you're suggesting that some people are not born with, say, a genetic or, say, a particular makeup that makes them a killer, correct?
That makes them, what's the last word you just used?
A killer.
A killer.
A killer.
I don't know if we know this. Who knows what sort of things can go wrong in the brain development and how they're affected through hormonal presences that during stages of development. I don't think we understand all the ways those affect us. We can guess, we can have theories, and I would expect it's multiplex, that there are many factors that come together. And then, of course, for the killer, there's also the moment in which the event occurs that for some people who might have that potential, maybe we all do, that moment just never happened to come about in the sequence of events.
Well, if we retroactively disassemble the killer's motivations, there are a bunch of socially appropriate milestones that they're breaching, and
Right.
those milestones are developmental, and so they've never reached those developmental milestones. And there are patterns, of course, people that are serial killers. Not very frequently are the kind of people that as children found animals in the woods and tortured them or were cruel. Cruelty is a factor. that separates conduct disorder from oppositional defiance. So, Greg, I'm glad that you were diagnosed with ODD instead of CD, because the cruelty factor is really what separates the two. And conduct disorder is much more highly correlated with being diagnosed with sociopathy than oppositional defiance is.
So Greg is just cruel rather than a killer.
No.
No.
He's less cruel.
I'm just
quite hard.
hateful and spiteful, not a killer, and not particularly cruel.
Mm-hmm.
So is it my understanding that most of you guys would say that all of us are just born neutral, and so right and wrong, it's not innate in any kind of context?
We're born self-serving.
Is somebody using a respirator?
Who didn't turn off their CPAP machine here? We got.
Yeah, I don't know if there is a bend toward goodness or just a neutrality. I don't know, and I suppose it doesn't make a difference. I'll tell you one thing I don't believe is this ridiculousness about being born with a sin nature.
I agree.
I don't think we're born wicked. I can tell you that.
But apparently Greg was diagnosed with sin nature. So,
Right. So that means it's not my fault. I wanted to go, I guess, back into a question from a moment ago about the biological, if we could find biological markers for people who are predestined in a way to be killers. If there's a way that we could, genetically or biologically via brain scan of an infant, discover that somebody is incapable of empathy and is very, very, very much more likely to be a killer.
we could just throw them in prison right then.
Unethical? Would it be unethical for us to throw them in prison or to kill them? I mean, what makes
Well, you need to
human
find somebody who had that gene
as well?
in order to get them the job to kill them.
Right. That's just killing infants. You need to hire one of them to keep it up. But Christopher, you said Minority Report. That's pre-crime. The idea of preventing something before it happens. But Nick, who used to join these, brought up once in a conversation with me that he doesn't consider sociopaths to be human. That is sort of his delineation for what it means to be human, is the ability to empathize and to feel compassion. How do we make that sort of a distinction? Is it wrong to kill something that wouldn't feel it was wrong to kill you?
So the atheist is arguing for baby killing.
Yeah, actually, he was arguing for CEO.
I was talking about you, but it's a joke.
Oh.
But is that what you're arguing? I mean, seriously, is that what we're talking about?
I'm not arguing for it. I'm asking the question. I mean, there's a lot of ethical dilemmas. These are a great way to explore the questions of morality. Look at things like the Kohlberg dilemmas. Other ethical dilemmas
Self-defense seems to be an almost involuntary response. And I don't think that people who defend themselves in a radical attack even ask the question. It's a response, and it's a survival response. And so I would think that, is it right? I don't know if it's right, but I think you're going to do it. If there's that spark of survival in you when you're being attacked and you need to survive.
That's not the question. The question is not should we kill somebody if they attack us. The question is should we kill somebody if we know they're going to attack us.
No, Joey, the question isn't should we. The question is could you condemn it as wrong if somebody were to decide to kill people?
I think should we is implied, but either way.
Could be. Yeah. There was actually a case in Texas, I can't remember where it was, where somebody threatened someone on the phone that they were going to kill him. And this guy then hangs up the phone, drives over to this other person's house, knocks on the door. The guy opens the door, and he shoots him. And he gets found not guilty by reason of self-defense.
That happened.
Only in Texas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, then we need to start discussing right and wrong, where it actually comes from. It may be all from Texas.
It comes from Texas.
Right, yeah. It's actually a small town in Texas.
LaGrange.
Now, has anybody ever spent some time? I mean, there's some great ethical dilemmas out there. Anybody ever been in like an ethics course where somebody's thrown some of these at you? Because I tell you that I have spent more time like chewing on some of these issues. Like, for example, there's the question of the out of control train in the school bus full of children. Say there's an out of control train that's barreling down the track. You are on a viaduct. You see this train coming. We have to assume in a hypothetical, you're also aware of plenty of things. Like, for example, you are an engineer and capable of knowing that you can absolutely derail this train, and with the way it will happen, it will not strike the school bus full of children that is stranded on the track up ahead. There's an engineer in the train. There's a large rock, and you have the ability to drop this rock onto the track in such a way that it will derail the train, killing the conductor, but saving the lives of the children. What should you do?
The greater
Is one of the children mine?
Well, yeah, I mean, in this case here, it's a pretty, it sort of Spock's the good of the many outweigh the good of the few, right? But you're intervening. You're making an action to kill one person who would survive to save the lives of dozens that wouldn't.
Yeah, even like on the Titanic, supposedly men and women, your children and women first, was the general rule. I have no idea. I'll tell you this. I don't think I could condemn anybody who made either decision.
What decision would you make? Anybody in the group here?
I'd be honest with you. If I thought I could put the rock on the track and not kill myself, I would be more apt to do that. If I thought I might kill myself, to be honest with you, I would wonder if I was worried that I would kill myself, I might think that worry would keep me from successfully.
Well, the hypothetical here is not killing yourself. It's killing the engineer of the train. You are a third party.
The way that you presented the question, Greg, was a little confusing. Initially, you said you were the conductor, but then, later you said that you simply had the power to kill the conductor, which I think is the more powerful
You're
question.
on a viaduct observing this. Yeah. You have the ability to drop a rock onto the track that will kill the conductor of the train, who is not you. Because I think that we can all agree that you can make the choice to kill yourself to save other people. And as a matter of fact, that's a wonderful example of what humans have almost universally considered to be heroic, is self-sacrifice in such a way.
Do you think people make that decision and they just act in order to, without even thinking of it?
There is a witnessing tool that the Protestants use, and it's a little video clip, I think, that most people have seen it on YouTube. And the man who lowers the bridge and raises the bridge, he has to make a decision because his son is actually on the bridge, underneath the bridge, in a position to where, in order to save the people who are rapidly coming toward the bridge, to cross the bridge, he has to crush his son. And so the presentation is the father makes a decision to crush his son in order to save everyone on the train. And so the question would be, would you do the same thing?
Which is a ridiculous question in the eyes of a theist, because the father is omnipotent and could simply save both. But
I understand your point. But
not only that, Greg.
This is a Protestant argument.
But the father is also the one that caused the children to
put it all together in this situation.
But
the
father
father
is also. Dr. Jones is trying to remove it from that context and say, if you were in that position, what would you do?
If it was my son, I'd let the people die.
I would. Well, I guess for both of them, I would probably have. I would kill the one versus the many. I think in my morality, I think I borrow some points of utilitarianism in there, where it is for the greater good. I mean, it's not necessarily black or white for me. It's a difficult decision. I will end up afterwards having to live with that guilt anyways, but I think it is the better of a choice. I would have either the guilt of, kids who haven't had the opportunity to live a life versus a conductor who,
Yeah. Isn't this the nature of tragedy? That, that not all decisions are a decision between the best and the worst, that some decisions are, the lesser of two evils, and that's a tragedy. And
But even though it's a tragedy, it points to the fact that in a moral world, we as adults choose a value of the greater good. You know what I mean? Like all of these things kind of point towards the moral value of the greater good. You know, altruism, empathy, and the prolongation of the population in general instead of an individual.
Well, the other thing here, though, is that this is not the only moral dilemma that's associated with it. It's fun to tweak details in them to nuance the different ways that we approach these questions. In this one, we're talking about moving an inanimate object into the way of an inanimate object that will cause the death of one person that would have survived, but save the lives of many that would not have survived. I'll tell you, in my case, I would do it, even if it was an equal number of adults in the train and an equal number of children in the bus, because the way I see it, the life of a child is more valuable than the life of an adult. It's a subjective call on my part, but I'd do it. Now, we can tweak another detail, though. What if it's not a rock you have to push? What if it's just a big fat guy?
Definitely.
That's good.
This is something that, again, we have to assume you know absolutely that it will work. But if you are given this knowledge that or if you have this knowledge that if you push this person, an innocent bystander, into the way of the train, and we can even say it's an unmanned train. What's the difference? One life. I mean, the conductor of the train or innocent bystander sitting on this bridge above the train.
Now,
can we still kill the person to save the children?
If it's a big fat guy, and part of the point is that it would take somebody his size to derail the train.
Right. That's the point of the big fat guy.
The other thing is this. Then if I'm not that big fat guy, I couldn't throw myself in front of the train instead.
Right.
But if I could throw myself in front of the train instead, I think that would make more sense.
Can we try to persuade the big fat guy to jump in front of the train himself?
You have 6 seconds.
Could we throw a chicken leg in front of the train, for example?
But nachos.
This is terrible.
What if no one was in? What if no one was in jeopardy? Would you push the big fat guy in front of the train, Greg?
Yeah, what if no one was in jeopardy, Greg?
Could you even do it?
Right. Let's say you have an opportunity to push a fat guy in front of a train. Would you do it? That's what this question is.
Now, what if there were 10 big fat guys?
Yeah, which one would you pick, Greg, out of the 10?
Sorry, I missed that question.
What if there were 10 big fat guys? Which one of the 10 would you pick?
The ugliest.
Okay.
No.
This is getting bad. This is getting really bad.
Let me tell you something though. As a pastor, I've been in a situation where you have somebody in front of you who has made a difficult choice, and the outcomes were not all that good. I'll tell you, some of these people can just live in tremendous torture, and my sense has always been. There's no good choices here, and people make these choices. I mean, we could set up a social a social experiment where we actually set up a school bus of kids and set up a train and put up these situations in place, and can we test to see how many people will put the rock on, how many people will throw the fat guy in the way, and how many people won't, and come up with a statistical analysis of this. No matter what a person chooses in such a horrible situation,
you're going to traumatize all of them.
I want to say that in the case of the rock and the children, or actually, let me go back to the example that Dr. Jones gave of my child under the bridge and the children over the bridge. I believe that, as Alex suggests, that the right decision is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. However, I don't know that I could make that decision if I were in that position. We had a viewer comment, actually it was Sean the Sean texted in, and he says this, he says, it has been proposed that psychopaths quickly do just the math of the situation.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
He said, it has been proposed that psychopaths quickly do the math of the situation.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting is that I don't feel that I could make that decision. If it's my son
They just come up with that rational
all
conclusion.
those kids
you
might
killed
die
one because there's more people that should.
But a psychopath standing there making that decision might make a better decision than myself. Seems strange.
Well, I'd like to bring it back to the point.
It's.
Well, hang on. Shane, who has not interrupted this whole
yeah.
show, is saying something. For God's sakes, let him talk.
Well, when Christopher and Alex were both bringing up the greater good, and Alex went and said, definitely, sacrifice the one for the many, and then Greg went back and said, well, if it was my son, then I would have to say no, I would do it. But in both of their minds, the greater good is two different outcomes. For Greg, the greater good is saving of his son. For Alex, the greater good is saving the numerical amount of people on the bus. So I found that definitely different because both consider that greater good in their mind. One is numerical and one is relational.
It certainly does boil down to a subjective value choice. So I'd love to get Jonathan Haidt, who has done quite a bit of research on this subject. Anybody who gets the opportunity, the website yourmorals.org has a bunch of quizzes and things that sort of help you to gauge where you fall in different spectrums and go into I guess a lot of different aspects of morality. They're put together by a large team of researchers into moral psychology and grad students and other research professors. But it's a fascinating field where they really do look into things like why I would make that call, and it's because realistically it's a tribalist idea. My son is part of my tribe and therefore has a greater value to me.
It's more of your responsibility.
That's true. But even if my son was an adult, it might not be quite as quick and easy of a response. I'd look at my son as being capable of putting himself in this situation. But I still, my tribe in that respect is going to win, and I'm a little ashamed to admit that. But I really I place so much on my family that there's very, very, very little that I would not do.
So we could add to this dilemma here by saying that the conductor is actually your eldest son. The fat guy is your middle son, and your youngest son is on the bus.
Yeah.
That
makes it much
This really
more difficult.
brings up a very good question in my mind, and I would like to hear various people comment on this. I have children. I have grandchildren. My wife and I talk all the time, and the more that she just opens herself up and we have these long conversations, the more that I get to know her so intimately, it seems like I've become a better person, and that's without question. And when I look at my children, they affect me so much, I become, even better. Both of us do. And when I look at my grandchildren, it's just incredible in contrast to where I was when we first had children. If some of you parents understand what I'm talking about, it seems like my morality is so much better or greater. Bob, I think maybe you can relate to what I'm saying. So how many of you guys are learning better moral standards because of your children, grandchildren, and possibly great-grandchildren?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah, particularly, we don't necessarily understand or appreciate the way we were hurt as children. We don't always appreciate and understand the ways in which we may have inadvertently hurt our own children. By the time we become grandparents, we have all that experience behind us, and I think it can have a profound effect on us. And one of the reasons why I think it's so important for extended families to maintain a connection. Kids need grandparents. They need cousins. They need people who care about them from various different standpoints and relationships, and who have these varied perspectives coming from different family units, coming from different generations, and I think that this can contribute to the well-being of all of us if we have that.
I have something to address about the train driver. This is Esther Ann. Some of you know me as Grace Ann. I wanted to say, I don't know how we can make even what is it equal to say it's one clear cut to say one life versus all these children's lives. What if that man's wife is disabled and his insurance will run out and her medical expenses are based on him continuing to work? Or maybe he has 4 children at home that he is supporting, and his daughter has 2 children without a husband that's there, so that adds it up to 6. Now, how many children are on the bus?
You make a very valid point that incomplete information is a significant factor in this as well. That, of course, snap decisions are not the same as well-informed decisions.
And then the reason also, and all right, we'll go with this because then I have a second issue that I wanted to address, and then it was the reason that I popped into the call because I was just I planned on just observing this evening, so I want to address the reason why I came on. But go ahead.
What was the reason you came on?
Oh, well, Alex had said that empathy, his main question was, why are we empathetic? Are we empathetic because we don't want to hurt somebody, because we don't go to jail, or maybe we'll feel guilt? I just wanted to bring a different perspective to that. A lot of times as a mom, and you said the children observe. They also observe how you respond to other people and how you treat other people, and that's the way they learn to interact. So I was very careful when they were growing up how I responded to other people. I wouldn't say certain things that I might say in our group in front of the children until they made on their own make that decision, but to set an example. So a lot of times when I see other people and I say I just want to just come out and say something that might offend somebody or hurt their feelings, I really don't think about what the repercussions on me is going to be. Am I going to feel guilty about that? That comes later. I'll deal with that later. But what is that going to do to them? How are they going to feel about that? Say I call somebody stupid. You should have known that. You're stupid. How is that going to impact that person? Are they going to buy into that? Is that going to become a part of their story that they're stupid? Especially if I'm an authority figure to them and they look up to me. You know, by trade I'm a pharmacist. If someone comes in and says, when it says take with food and drink, does that mean you put the food in your mouth, put the pill in, and swallow it together? You know, no, you can eat your food and you can take your pill afterwards. That's what take with food means. I don't just come out and say, well, that was really stupid, you know. Although I felt that way several times, but, you know, because then it's going to be,
what you're talking about here,
that's going to make the person feel, wow, I was really stupid. I'm embarrassed. I shouldn't have said. Of course, I'm thinking of them, how it's going to affect them in the future, how they're going to look at themselves. Is it going to be part of their story for a very long time that they're stupid? That's what empathy is, caring about and loving the person and nurturing them for the future, for ongoing. And I don't even think that we can't even do that for each other, too. You say it's important that the kids have grandparents. Well, it's really important that I have Chris or I have Bob,
sure,
because you guys really do impact me a lot. I'm changing the way I look at myself. I'm becoming more confident to speak out. And these are things that you do, I believe, for my good and for my good only, not because it's going to make you feel proud of yourself or whatever. So I think empathy goes in positive ways and in negative ways. You're very empathetic to the fact that maybe she's not very self-confident.
Right.
Am I going?
I think what you're talking about here, though, is empathy as it develops may begin as rooted in the vulnerability of the self, but it can actually grow to a point where it transcends that and detaches from self and truly becomes other-centered.
Right. So that's the difference. I never looked at the word as empathy having anything to do. If it's empathy, how someone else feels, it's all about that.
Yeah, I would think a 4-year-old might have a hard time experiencing empathy in that detached manner,
Right.
and might learn it through recognizing how things affect them. But I do think that an adult who's not inhibited in their healthy development will develop an empathy eventually that truly transcends. I would also think that empathy becomes something that comes out of a more primitive feeling. Some feelings that we have are based upon our interpretation of events, but other things like the fear of snakes, for some people, it seems to operate at a very much more primitive level that bypasses all of the rational processes to some degree, and it isn't as easily modified by it. I would wonder if empathy is one of those more primitive feelings. I don't know, but I would
Bob,
wonder.
I think that Esther Ann is making a really good point that I think I may agree with, and that is that if the 4-year-old isn't acting out of the interest of another person, and it looks like empathy, but it's not, it's not strictly about that other person, maybe it isn't empathy.
Well, it isn't. But I mean, developmentally, it seems to me that we recognize that children psychologically, as they grow, develop certain capacities that aren't there initially. And go through stages of development, kind of like the way fetus goes through various different stages of development, and then next thing you know, we got a human being out here in the world.
Sure.
And I think that there's some development to these characteristics and traits that take a time to maturate.
Yeah, I agree. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is about time to close the show. What do you think, Dr. Jones?
I'm really enjoying this conversation because I think that people are contributing a lot. I didn't get to hear from everyone, and so before we close out, I would like for everyone to share maybe a couple
we
minutes
generally
worth
require anybody who hasn't participated in the conversation to sing a song at the end of the show.
That would be nice.
That's our custom. So Matthew Land, you're the only person that hasn't contributed, so what song are you going to sing for us this evening?
Punky Town. I don't know if you know that, but
go for it. Tear it up, man.
No, I can't hit this. But I do want to say about what Greg said. Like he would save his son, and I have a daughter. I would save my daughter also. I would kill the conductor and the kids on the bus to save my daughter. But that doesn't make my difference. But we're talking about which one is moral and which one's not. I would agree that it's moral of me to save my daughter, but I would do it anyway. I would just make an immoral decision. I can confess that would be immoral as far as this, society goes, and probably like some sort of intrinsic idea of morality. But I would make that as well.
I have to agree that there's something to be said with. I would recognize that the decision that I was making is not a moral decision. That what I was doing was wrong by ethical standards, but I simply would not care.
I didn't.
Which I'm with you.
I actually didn't catch what Matthew said at the beginning about his dog, and I thought that he was just saying, "I would kill both the conductor and the children."
Yeah, I would let the train hit the children on the bus, and then I would go down and find the conductor, hunt him down if he got away.
Well, how do you know that's true? That's not moral.
Yeah, maybe the conductor could have stopped the train the whole time, and he deserves to die. That conductor's obviously a sociopath.
What is the conductor's standard for truth? Let me hear his version and the children's version, and then I'll decide. Daryl, we also haven't heard from you all show, so why don't you sing us a song or give us a comment?
It is well with my soul. I haven't heard much of what's gone on. My mind has been so broken up, I haven't got to hear a lot of it, and I've just hung with it, hearing what I could, and enjoyed what I did hear.
No problem.
I sang my song.
You did. You only sang part of it, but that's okay.
Oh, you don't want me to sing the whole thing.
So do we need to make a round, or are we just going to?
Yeah, let's make a round. I want to hear from
All right,
everyone.
Dr. Jones always wants to have everybody make at least 2 to 3 closing comments before we end the show. So why don't we work from our left to right? Alex, why don't you give us a closing comment?
I think I'll do this in character. I can't have children, so I don't know what any of you are feeling. No, I don't think any of these decisions, these snap decisions, are easy to make. I was bringing up utilitarianism and the numerical calculations because at that point in time, that's all I have to go with. I think it's the greater good in that situation. And ultimately, I would still have to live with the guilt of causing someone's death, regardless if it's 20 kids or one conductor with a family. I don't know anybody's story, but I have to make a decision. So that's ultimately what I would go with. It's very rigid, but it's the only thing I have at that time.
Very good. Bob, your turn. Oh, he's muted. Hold on just a minute, Bob. Unmute him. You were playing your guitar over the top of Matthew Land, so we.
Oh, I was trying to give Matthew Land the.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Anyway, yeah, I don't think that a snap decision is the kind of thing we can easily evaluate. And no matter what snap decision I made, I think I could appreciate the problem of it being a snap decision and easily come to terms with the bad feelings I might have over what that consequence was. So I in some ways I see it as a false dilemma. It's just a horrible situation.
Christopher, your turn.
Well, I think that the bottom line for me is morals are a mystery. I can't really account for them because they're a part of consciousness, and consciousness is still a mystery. So I think that a more edifying topic would be whose hair is more awesome, mine or Alex's?
Alex wins. Widow's Peak.
Oh. Man,
So thick and lush.
And that, Christopher, is what we call a snap decision. Esteban, over to you.
Actually, that's been very, very thoroughly considered.
Oh, okay. Esteban.
Well, I was just going to play my bass for my buddy there, Chris, but I don't have anything but my baby Martin here, so I don't really have any further comments. That's it, guys. It was an enjoyable time being
Well, thanks
with you.
for being with us. Be sure to come back and join us next week.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm going to skip Greg and come back to him since he's the moderator. Actually, I think that's all we have. Greg, why don't you close out the Hangouts for us with a final comment?
We didn't give Shane an opportunity.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, he's
closing comment.
He was hiding in the dark.
This is
Shane,
why I'm the moderator.
There's someone else
Thank you.
in the dark.
Shane, go ahead.
I just appreciate it, guys. I think I'm loving this discussion. I think we did not talk about one decision, which would have been indecision. And I think in the intensity of fear in that situation, I believe a majority of people would act in that decision, which would be indecision, if we were talking 6 seconds.
Right.
Sure. Okay.
point.
There's nobody else in the dark, Dr. Jones. You're thinking of Matthew Land.
Okay.
Greg, close us out.
I think that Shane made a marvelous point at the end there about the indecision or the failure to act not being a conscious decision even in such a small or short period of time. But I think that I'm not going to grant what Bob said about these dilemmas not being or being false dilemmas, because I think that they're worth considering, and that's where the value of these dilemmas are. Obviously, they're fabricated events, but it's something that I believe there's a lot of value in exploring these dilemmas in many different ways and facets, and changing variables and details to better understand where our own personal morality and values come from. So on that, I'd like to say after the official show is done, I certainly have some time to stick around and cover more dilemmas, because I love these things. So if anybody wants to stick around, I'd love to have more chat on that.
Very good. And while you were talking, we got a nice slideshow of various photographs of your face, which was lovely. Let's bring Google Hangouts down now, and Dr. Jones, why don't you give us final statements before we end the show?
One of the things that I love about this kind of hangout is that we get to discuss what is moral, and it helps us to move past the biblical text in a sense. It helps us to say to ourselves, what do we think instead of what do they think? And I think this is the kind of discussion that needs to continue, and it needs to be encouraged in other people so people can feel like they have the right to take control over their own lives and responsibility, etc. And I think that we've been stuck for too long in theology, allowing ancients and everyone else to call the shots. And I was very proud of all of the comments tonight. I thought it was very interesting.
I think a big statement is made just by having this conversation, and that is that there are voices besides religious books that matter.
Yeah, and the thing that really makes a lot of sense to me, and I could not see this years ago, was atheists. They have a lot of morals, and I was taught that they had no morals at all. I was taught there's none good, no, not one. And I'm looking at people who are extremely moral, people who are very conscientious, almost A to Z, if not A to Z. And so I'm thankful that this discussion, this conversation is going on. It's wonderful. With that said, we are going to get out of here. Once again, this is the Cult of Honesty, and you guys have a good night.